So today, guys, we are going to be going through we're going to be looking at the different types of sleep disorders, and we can actually define our different types of sleep disorders into 3 categories. The first category of sleep disorders we're looking at are called circadian phase disorders. These are sleep disorders that directly affect our sleep-wake cycle. Okay, we're also going to look at parasomnias and dyssomnias in the next spread. Okay, those are things like insomnia and sleepwalking. And then in the last spread, we're just going to look at 2 very simple and straightforward treatments that we use to basically manage those sleep disorders. So if someone has that sleep disorder, this is kind of the treatment or the management strategy that we use to help them. Okay, so the first thing is the circadian phase disorders. So a circadian phase disorder is basically a disorder that involves some kind of interruption or some kind of disruption to your normal sleep-wake cycle. Remember that we said that the sleep-wake cycle is an example of a circadian rhythm. Okay, and a circadian rhythm is an example of a biological cycle that happens once every 24 hours. Remember the 3 photos of the boy falling asleep and then waking up and then falling asleep again? And we said the time at which he falls asleep here in the first picture compared to the time he falls asleep again in the last picture is a 24-hour cycle. Okay, and in the middle picture, he was like awake. Okay, so that 24 hours cycle is called the sleep-wake cycle or the sleep-wake pattern. When someone has a disorder or when someone is having a lifestyle that stops them from having a normal sleep-wake cycle, for example, sleeping at 9 p.m., waking up at 7 a.m., that's like a typical or normal kind of sleep-wake cycle. If you're, for example, a shift worker who's working a night shift, or you're, a nurse, or you are a midwife who has to do night shifts, okay, you are not going to be sleeping at the normal time that everyone else is. You'll be awake during the time everyone else is asleep, and you'll be kind of asleep at like 1 or 2 o'clock, like in the afternoon, once your shift is done. Okay, so that is not a normal sleep-wake pattern. And a lot of people who do things like shift work, people who travel a lot and experience a lot of jet lag, actually experience these circadian phase disorders. Okay, so that's what a circadian phase disorder is. It's an example of a sleep disorder that occurs because of an interruption or a disruption to the normal sleep-wake cycle. And there's a mismatch between the person's normal sleep-wake pattern that they have and the sleep-wake cycle pattern that is normal or typical or that is required of them. Okay, so that's basically what these circadian phase disorders mean. And we're going to learn about 3 specific I just already talked about that image, okay? So we don't have to go through this slide, but this is just to recap. These are images taken from the previous chapter, just to jog your memory of what the sleep-wake cycle is, okay, and what it looks like. Now, this is a huge thing. It's got a lot of information in it, this diagram here. You're not required to memorize any of these, okay? This is just for your information there, for you to see at different points of the day when things happen, okay? Probably the most important thing for you to know is that in the evening time, in the evening time or in the nighttime when it's dark, melanin secretion or melanin release begins. Okay, and we say that when melanin, which is our sleep hormone, begins to be released, this is when we start to feel sleepy. Okay, this is when the Z's come in. In the morning, though, melatonin secretion or melatonin release stops. Okay, or it's reduced or it's suppressed because we see the light. Okay, as we see the light, our bodies basically stop releasing melatonin. And this is what allows us to be nice and awake and alert, okay, and feel ready to take on the day. So this is for people with a normal sleep-wake cycle. All 3 disorders that we're looking at today in terms of circadian phase disorders are examples of people who do not have normal sleep-wake cycles, okay? There's a mismatch between the cycle that they have versus the cycle that they should be having, okay, as a normal person, okay? But because of things like shift work, because of things like too much travel and jet lag, they might be experiencing issues with that, okay? So you don't need to memorize any of these things, just understand maybe those 2 blue ones I've circled there, okay? So scribble out all the rest. The main blue ones, and not even the times, okay? It's just about knowing that when it's nighttime, when it's dark outside, that's when melatonin gets released, and that when it's light outside and, it's morning, that's when melatonin gets stopped or melatonin release is stopped. Alrighty. So the 3 types of circadian phase disorders that we're looking at in this spread are adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift, okay? The shift work or the issues that people have with sleep who are shift workers, and as well as jet lag, okay? So the issues or interruptions to sleep that you have when you're constantly rapidly moving from one time zone to the next and your sleep-wake cycle is trying really hard to catch up, but it can't. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So the first one is called the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift. This is the basic idea that when an adolescent reaches puberty, they actually have, we already know that when adolescents reach puberty, there's a big change in the kinds of hormones that are released and when those hormones are released. Okay, we know hormones, for example, like the growth hormone play a role. Okay, we know that hormones like the luteinizing hormone play a role. But actually, the melatonin or the sleep hormone is also affected as the adolescent reaches, as the child reaches puberty and becomes an adolescent. Melatonin is the sleep hormone, and how it's affected is that when you're an adolescent, that sleep hormone is actually released a little bit later into the night compared to when you were a child. Okay, so basically that's the idea. Okay, that's the idea. So when we're talking about melatonin, we're talking about this idea that when melatonin is released, the person feels less sleepy. Okay. And the person feels more sleepy, and thus they are more likely to go to bed at that time. Now, what happens is if you're a child and your melatonin was getting released at, let's say, 8:30 in the nighttime, okay, you might then feel sleepy by about, 8:45 or 9 o'clock. Okay, that's like when you're a child. But when you're an adolescent, your melatonin might not start getting released until about 11 p.m. Okay, and this is why at 11 p.m., you are still active and you are still not feeling sleepy, but your little brother or sister who's in maybe grade 3 or grade 4 or grade 2, they might be feeling sleepy. They might be already in deep sleep in their bed. Okay, so that's the basic idea when we're talking about the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift. Okay, this idea that melatonin is released later in the night for adolescents compared to children. Okay, and that's why we call it the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift, because there's a shift forward of the adolescent sleep-wake cycle when they reach adolescence. This is why you guys, most of you would still not feel sleepy at about 8 o'clock. Even if you try to force yourself to go to bed at 8 o'clock, you can't do it because melatonin has not yet been released in your brain. Okay, so we call that the delayed sleep phase onset. And this is kind of one of the reasons why the adolescent feels sleepy later into the night. And they also have trouble waking up because, look, school times haven't changed. Everyone is still expected to get to school by 9 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. So at the end of the day, you're not getting enough sleep. And that's why a lot of adolescents in period 1 or period 2 of school, they're really sleepy, they're really exhausted, they're really tired. Okay, so that's the basic idea. The shift is that you fall asleep later and that you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, okay, because you've had less sleep there. So when we're looking at this topic of adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift, it's important for you guys to know the biological factors behind it, which are basically the delayed release of melatonin, the fact that melatonin might get released at 11 p.m. compared to like 8 p.m. or 7 p.m. Okay, that's just an example. You don't need to know the specific timings there. Psychological factors, okay, we know that when you become an adolescent, you grow in terms of height, but also you start experiencing different things. Okay, a lot of adolescents start developing mental health issues, okay, from their friends' networks or from, dramas that might happen in school. Okay, a lot of adolescents start overthinking. Okay, adolescents start to be more conscious of things like their body image, things like what people think about them. Heavy school workloads. Okay, the older you get in school, the more work you generally have. Okay, so heavy school workloads can also influence that. Working a part-time job is another social factor that can influence your your ability to sleep on time and your ability to wake up feeling refreshed, okay, as well as other things like problems with friends, conflict with family. All of these are other examples of social factors. So what I want you guys to do for the SAC is just learn one example for each. So one biological factor, and we've only got one, that's melatonin, okay, the delayed release of melatonin during adolescence. One psychological factor, so you can do overthinking, you can do mental health issues, stress, okay, and one social factor. So maybe you can do heavy school workload, working a part-time job, problems with friends, whichever one is easiest for you to memorize. Okay, so that's the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift. Now, the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift is an example of a circadian phase disorder because, again, if we think about the definition of circadian phase, if we just go one slide back there, the definition for the circadian phase disorder is that there's a mismatch between the person's normal sleep-wake pattern as well as what's expected of them. Remember when we did the previous, spread last week, and we talked about the fact that adolescents are required to have at least about 9 hours of sleep. But a lot of the time, adolescents don't get that because of this idea of the sleep-wake cycle shift. Even if they want to get 9 hours, they don't feel sleepy until maybe 12 or 1 in the morning. Okay, and then they've only got probably 6 or 7 hours of sleep before they get to school the next day. So that's why the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift is an example of a circadian phase disorder. Okay, so that's the adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift. The next type of circadian phase disorder that we're looking at is something called jet lag. Okay, we all know what jet lag is. We've probably experienced it ourselves as well. Okay, jet lag is this basic idea that when you go to a country, you know, and you come back from that country, particularly if the country is really further away from your own country, you're more likely to experience sleep disturbances because of the differences in time zones. Okay, so jet lag is basically when you have a sleep disorder that results from the experience of jet lag because you've been rapidly traveling across multiple time zones. Now, can anyone in the chat box maybe mention which type of people in which type of occupations or careers do you think are most likely to develop jet lag compared to others?
What was the question, Miss?
So the question was, which type of people in which careers or occupations are most likely to develop jet lag?
Flight attendants or like people like who run a business.
Flight attendants is a good answer. Yeah, so we got some other answers as well here in the chat box. So business workers, if you're a CEO, you're doing a lot of traveling, that's a good one. Yep, flight attendants, pilots, excellent. Okay, so all of these are examples of people who are more likely to develop jet lag compared to the normal person. Look, we might go overseas, go back home, visit our grandparents or whatever, but we don't do that a lot. Okay, so we're not traveling across multiple time zones very frequently, but these people in those careers are doing rapid travel. And remember, like back in the olden days when planes weren't in existence, people used to travel by boat. It used to take ages for them to get from one place to the other. So their bodies were able to slowly adjust to that transition. But now in today's world, you can go from one side of the world to the other side of the world in like less than 24 hours. And your brain is trying its best to catch up with that difference in time zone. Okay, jet lag is that experience of disorientation and the sleep disturbance that comes to that when you are traveling across multiple time zones and your sleep-wake cycle simply does not have time to adjust to the new time zone. Okay, and that results to a mismatch between what our brain thinks the time zone is outside, as well as the actual time zone that our body is physically in. Okay, so it's kind of like a battle between what the brain thinks it's in and then what the body is actually in terms of the time zone. So our body might feel like it's time to sleep in the middle of the afternoon in the new time zone, because in our old time zone that we've come from, it's actually nighttime. So that's what our brain thinks, that it's ready to sleep. Okay, so that's what jet lag is. Now, we've all experienced jet lag in some form or the other, most likely when we've come back, okay, from going overseas or from a trip. These are some symptoms of jet lag. You can use the memory tip flipped, okay, FLIPD. It's not spelled correctly, but it's just the memory tip, okay, FLIPD, to remember the different symptoms of jet lag, okay? And honestly, if you've ever forgotten this on the SAC, just think about yourself. Think about when you came back from a country or when you came back from going overseas, what are some symptoms you experience? Because jet lag is something we've all experienced at some point or the other, okay? So flipped, and you can remember this memory tip because when you've got jet lag, your sleep-wake cycle is kind of flipped, okay? So you can remember it that way. So F for feeling unwell, L for low levels of daytime alertness. So when someone's talking to you in the daytime after you've come back from a trip, you might be looking at them and nodding your head, but you're not really paying much attention to what they're saying. Impaired concentration and cognitive ability. So again, if you were given a quiz or a test, you might not be able to do as well on that test if you were jet lagged. Problems with falling asleep and waking up. And again, this is the direct effect of jet lag on your sleep-wake cycle, because that's what our sleep-wake cycle is, right? It's about how do you fall asleep and then how do you wake up and the times at which that happens, as well as this general feeling of discomfort or this blah feeling, like I just feel blah, okay? The technical word for that blah feeling is actually malaise, so MALAISE. Okay, so if you ever see that on another resource that you're using like checkpoints or anything or NEEP, that basically just means that discomfort, that uncomfortable feeling that you get, that bodily discomfort that you experience. Okay, so guys, for the SAC, you don't have to learn all of these, but maybe just learn at least 3. Okay, so if you forget one, then you've got another one to kind of back you up. So that's basically the symptoms of jet lag. Okay, and The last kind of circadian phase disorder that we're looking at is called shift work, okay? It's basically any kind of sleep disturbance that you experience as a result of being a shift worker, okay? As a result of, for example, as a result of working during the times when normal people or when usual people are asleep, okay? So that's what shift work is. So shift work basically refers to work that happens on a schedule that's outside the normal 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. working day, okay, at times when people would usually be asleep. You don't need to know this definition, okay? We know generally when a person works a night shift, we know what that means, okay? So you don't need to really stress too much about this definition. What I do want you to stress about, though, is these 2 points here, okay? People who do shift work tend to have disruptions to their sleep-wake cycle, because remember when we learned about the survival theory of sleep, which is actually called the evolutionary theory of sleep, we learned about this idea that when it's nighttime, what are we supposed to do when it's nighttime, according to the evolutionary theory of sleep? When it's dark and it's gloomy outside and we can't see, what are we expected to do? Sleep. Excellent. Okay, we're supposed to sleep. So the shift work circadian phase disorder, if you've got a sleep disturbance or you get a circadian phase disorder related to sleep, less sleep because you're a shift worker, it's basically because we're not biologically programmed to stay awake. And a lot of people who work night shift actually develop a lot of health issues, especially when they're starting out. For example, one of my friends who's a midwife, so nurse and midwife both, when she first started working night shifts and stuff, she would say she'd have headaches every day, in terms of she would develop a lot of breakouts on her skin because her hormones were playing up and that kind of stuff. So again, shift work, some careers you just have to do shift work, you can't avoid it, but you have to remember that it's not a normal way of life. Even if we try to make it a normal way of life, we can habituate to that, we can get used to it, but it's not really that great in terms of a sleep-wake cycle. It does kind of stuff up a few other functions there. Okay, so another thing to remember is that when you're working shifts or when you are a shift worker, you're more likely to experience decreased judgment, poor decision-making skills, okay, and you're basically able to think less clearly as well, okay, and this is an issue because when you think less clearly, you're more likely to make mistakes. Now imagine you're a surgeon or a nurse, you're dealing with people's lives there, okay, and if you've got decreased judgment, you've got that person's life in your hands, you might actually do some harm to that person, okay? And that's why it's, people that work in these fields where they shift work, they're always working rotations. It's not like a person works night shift for the whole year. They're only working it for a few weeks at a time, because if you were to make that person, work night shift for the whole year, they would basically run themselves into the ground and probably run others around them into the ground as well, okay? Because they would be very irritable. Now, when we talk about shift workers having these effects like decreased judgment, poor decision-making, being able to think and concentrate less clearly, can anyone in the chat box mention what's the name of that effect? Remember we learned about the A, B, C effects. What's the name of the effect given to people who have decreased judgment, decreased thinking skills, and all that stuff as a result of being sleep deprived? Excellent, cognitive, awesome. Yeah, so basically people who experience sleep disturbances due to shift work have decreased cognitive skills, okay, or they have cognitive effects in the sense that their usual cognitive performance is reduced, okay, they're not on top of their game when it comes to things like making good judgments, making good decisions, okay, so these people are more at risk of that. Okay, so that's our first category of sleep disorders, and we call these 3 circadian phase disorders. Now I've put this table in your PowerPoint as well, it's taken from your book. Look, like I say, I always put the tables in because those of you who are studying maybe a bit last minute for the SAC, who don't want to go through all the normal slides, just go through this. This gives you an overview of basically all the circadian phase disorders that we've looked at now, as well as the impact on the sleep-wake cycle and the symptoms. So this is like the bare minimum that I would kind of expect you guys to know, okay? The bare minimum that will probably get you through if you are so strapped for time or if you are so stressed that you can't go through the other slides in detail there. Okay, so the next type of sleep disorders that we're looking at, guys, are called Dyssomnias and Parasomnias, okay? And as the name suggests, Dyssomnias sounds a little bit like insomnias, and that's what they are. Dyssomnias are just the umbrella term, and one type of dysomnia or one example of a dysomnia is a parasomnia. It's like me saying, for example, that, cardiovascular disease. Okay, cardiovascular disease, that's the big umbrella term. And one type of cardiovascular disease is high blood pressure. Okay, it's like saying that. The same way, Dyssomnias are a big umbrella term. And one type of dysomnia is sleep-onset insomnia. Okay, I know usually in everyday life, we don't call it sleep onset insomnia, we just say insomnia. But guys, for the purpose of the study design, for the purpose of using proper key terminology that VCA expects, you have to say sleep onset insomnia, not just insomnia. If you just write insomnia in the exam for a question, they'll mark it wrong because they'll say that you're not using the proper keyword. Okay, so the other type of thing that we look at in this slide, the other type of sleep disorder is parasomnias. Again, that's a big umbrella term. And the specific type of parasomnia that we're looking at is sleepwalking, which is interesting. And, you know, you would have seen it covered a lot in different cartoons or different TV shows when you were growing up, maybe. Okay, maybe you've known someone who's actually been a sleepwalker. Okay, it's not super common, but it does happen. Okay, and sleepwalking is not as terrifying as some people make it out to be as well. So we're going to learn about these two sleep disorders in this slide. So before we look at the specific types of sleep disorders, it's just important for us to know what a sleep disorder is. So a sleep disorder is basically any sleep-related issue. We call it a disorder because similar to like a mental disorder, which we've gone through last year and which we'll go through in the next outcome, sleep disorder causes significant effects on a person's functioning or day-to-day life. It causes impairment and it causes dysfunction. Okay, so that's why we say a sleep disorder is different from a temporary sleep issue because it's more ongoing. And a sleep disorder is not just more ongoing, but it's also going to affect that person's day-to-day functioning. So it might affect their ability to go to school on time. It might affect their ability to meet deadlines at work. Okay, might affect their ability to meet up with a friend or meet up with a loved one. Okay, just to see them outside of their normal schedule. Okay, so it does affect a person's ability to live a normal life there. Okay, so that's the idea there. So now we're going to look at the two types of sleep disorders, or the two kind, not two types, I would say, the two kind of forms, okay? Sleep disorders can be of two types or two forms. They can be primary, where the impairment in sleep is due to the actual condition. And this is the case for sleep-onset insomnia. Okay, people who have sleep-onset insomnia, somehow their sleep-wake cycle is not balanced. And that directly causes, or that is the primary cause for the insomnia that they experience. In other words, or in other terms, we can also have secondary sleep disorders. Secondary sleep disorders are when there's no major issue with your sleep-wake cycle, but you're staying up and you're unable to sleep because maybe you've got migraines. Okay, if you're a little bit older, maybe you have pain in your joints. Okay, if you've had a heavy day at the gym and you're really sore and you're in pain, that's the reason you're staying up. Okay, those are secondary reasons, or not the main primary reason for you staying up. Okay, so that's basically what we call secondary sleep disorder. So in a scenario, guys, if it says, okay, so-and-so, Katie has been staying up late for the past few nights. This is because she's been consuming a lot of coffee and she can't go to sleep because she's got a headache. That would not be an example of a primary sleep disorder. In fact, that would not be an example of sleep onset insomnia, okay? Because it's due to another reason. It's due to her coffee consumption. So you would then say that's an example of a secondary sleep disorder. It doesn't classify as being insomnia. We're going to look at the different criteria that need to exist in order for insomnia to be diagnosed in a person, okay? So we'll look at that in just a few seconds now. Okay, so when we're talking about dysomnias, guys, there's only one type. Now, the reason I've put this slide in is that in past or in older exams, you might see narcolepsy coming up. Narcolepsy was actually in the study design right at the beginning in 2017 when the study design was published, it was there. Mid-2017, VCA decided, nah, let's get it out. So they've removed it. It hasn't been tested since. So if you ever see the word narcolepsy, that is not in our study design. Just skip that question completely. You will not be assessed on this in the SAC or in the exam this year. So narcolepsy, just forget about it. The only one you're going to learn about is sleep onset insomnia. Okay, now dysomnias, as I said before, one type of dysomnia is sleep onset insomnia. They sound the same as well. But dysomnias as a whole refer to sleep issues or sleep conditions that involve difficulty. So D for dysomnia, D for difficulties falling asleep, as well as disruptions to the sleep-wake cycle. Okay, so that's how you can remember what dysomnias are about. So sleep onset insomnia, as the name suggests, and as we already probably know just from our general knowledge, sleep onset insomnia is a sleep disorder. Okay, it does impact your daily functioning, and it's because the person experiences a persistent or continued or constant difficulty to fall asleep at the usual time. So if your usual sleep time is, let's say, 12 a.m., okay, if your usual sleep time is 12 a.m. and you can't fall asleep at 12 a.m., and that happens like over a period of time, you know, according to the criteria that we're going to look at, then you might be diagnosed with sleep onset insomnia. If you can't fall asleep just once a week at 12 a.m., but every other day you're falling asleep perfectly, that's not sleep onset insomnia. Okay, insomnia is a condition. It's like, you know, when people say, oh, I'm so depressed, but you just had like one single sad moment in like a whole week. That's not what depression is. In the same way, when you just stayed up for like one night a week and every other night you had normal sleep, didn't have any issues falling asleep, that's not sleep onset insomnia. Okay, so a lot of the time people do overuse this word incorrectly, but sleep onset insomnia, according to the psychological term, is that persistent difficulty to fall asleep at the usual sleep time. Okay, now, although the person has more than enough opportunities to sleep, there's nothing keeping them awake. It takes them a much longer time to sleep. So this person might have come into bed, you know, at, it's 2:25 a.m. on their clock. They might have come into bed at 12 o'clock, but they're still awake at 2:25 a.m. in the morning. Even though they gave themselves the opportunity to fall asleep, they were in bed and, you know, they weren't on their phone or whatever, they were not able to sleep there. Okay, sleep onset means falling asleep. So sleep onset insomnia is an inability to fall asleep, which then obviously, as a follow-on effect, when you're not able to fall asleep, it's harder for you to wake up because you've missed out on so many hours of sleep there. Okay, as we said in the previous slide, sleep onset insomnia is a primary sleep disorder because it directly affects your sleep-wake cycle and directly interrupts or disrupts your sleep-wake cycle, causing that imbalance. Okay, so that is basically the just a few kind of key ideas about what sleep onset insomnia is. Okay, how would we diagnose? Now, if you have been missing out on a lot of sleep, or if you know someone who's been missing out on a lot of sleep, generally these people are referred to a doctor or a psychologist who can actually diagnose their sleep issue as being either sleep onset insomnia or just something else, maybe due to medicine they're taking, maybe due to too much caffeine intake. If you've got sleep onset insomnia, first of all, you will experience poor sleep quality. You will experience what is called as fragmented or broken sleep. That's basically that's basically you going to sleep and you waking up and then going to sleep again and waking up again. Okay, that's broken sleep. It's not continuous. Okay, you keep waking up throughout the night. Another key criteria or a key number you need to remember is that you regularly experience difficulty falling asleep after 20 to 30 minutes of going to bed. Usually most of us who have healthy sleep patterns or relatively healthy sleep patterns, once our head once your head hits the pillow, you are most likely to fall asleep within about 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, you don't need to time yourself there, but generally that's the time it takes us to fall asleep if we're actually tired and we go to bed feeling tired. Okay, difficulty in going to sleep occurs at least 3 times a week, so it's not just a one-time occurrence. It does happen 3 or more times a week there. Sleep difficulties are experienced consistently, so on an ongoing basis for at least 3 months. So remember, at least 3 times a week for at least 3 months. So 3, the numbers are the same. Another criteria or a symptom we would use to diagnose someone is that the person experiences impairments in the social functioning, emotional functioning, and occupational functioning. Social, for example, they can't even meet up with a friend because they're just so tired to get out of bed. Emotional, meaning that they start to snap at people around them, even though those people haven't done anything to make them feel that way. And occupational means, for example, you're not able to go to school, you're not able to meet deadlines at work because you just cannot go to sleep at night. And that causes you to feel grumpy the whole day of the next day. And that causes you to feel so sleep deprived as well. Again, people who obviously have sleep onset insomnia experience a lot of sleep deprivation as well. They are sleep deprived and they experience all the negative effects of that sleep deprivation as well. Okay, so and finally, another criteria that we can talk about is that there's a shift in the sleep-wake cycle timing, okay? Because these people might be falling asleep at 2:30 a.m. instead of the 12 o'clock time that they should usually be asleep. that then causes them to lose every day or every night 2.5 hours of sleep. And over time, that causes them to not just fall asleep later, but to also wake up later compared to normal individuals, okay? And we call that the delayed sleep phase disorder, okay? So this is not just something that affects teenagers or adolescents, as we learned about in the previous slide, but something that can also affect people who have sleep onset insomnia. Okay, and if you're a teenager and you have sleep onset insomnia, then you're kind of doubly affected by both of those conditions there. Okay, so let's just move on to the next kind of part, which is looking at the effect of sleep onset insomnia on sleep-wake cycle. Before that, guys, with the symptoms, you don't have to learn all of them. I'd say just learn about 3. Okay, so you got, how many have you got here? 6. Just learn any 3 that are easiest for you to remember there. Okay, with the numbers, at least keep the numbers in your head. You don't have to know them in detail, but just keep those numbers in your head. That 20 to 30 minutes is how long it should take you to fall asleep. But people with sleep onset insomnia don't fall asleep within that 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so just remember those numbers there. Okay, so when we're looking at the impact of sleep onset insomnia on the sleep-wake cycle, you don't have to learn all of these, just learn any 2 that are easiest for you to understand and remember. Okay, we're never going to ask you for a specific one. If we do ask you, we'll just ask you to explain the impact of Katie's sleep onset insomnia on her sleep-wake cycle. It'll just be a generally worded question like that. So you can just choose any 2. These are very similar to the things we talked about before. The first delay or the first effect on sleep-wake cycle is that the person has a delay in falling asleep and staying asleep. Okay, they have excessive daytime sleepiness due to missing out on the deep sleep in the night before. Okay, because they haven't fallen asleep, they miss out on the deep, restful sleep that other people would have experienced. Also, because they stayed awake a longer time, they're not able to have a proper amount of REM sleep. Okay, remember we said that as the night goes on, the time that you spend in REM sleep gets longer and longer, as we saw in that hypnogram we looked at. Okay, the chunks or the pink color blocks of represented the REM sleep, right? If you're not sleeping properly to begin with, you're not going to have a lot of REM sleep or deep sleep to begin with as well. Okay, and that does affect your ability to sleep there. The last thing that we can look at, and I think this is a really easy one to remember, is fragmented sleep, or what we call as broken sleep. Someone who's got sleep onset insomnia, even when they eventually fall asleep, within 2-3 hours, they're up again. They're kind of waking up, tossing and turning in bed. That sleep is not continuous. It's not ongoing. It's broken. And because it's broken, this again affects their ability to reach REM sleep properly, as well as spend a good amount of time in NREM stage 3 and 4. Remember with stage 3 and 4, we said these are the deeper stages of sleep. And if someone wakes up during these stages, they feel disoriented and confused, and they feel this blah feeling like, where am I? What time is it? Like that. So you can imagine someone with sleep onset insomnia experiencing that every night and the kind of effects that it has on their functioning there. Okay, so again, there's 4 points here, guys. Just learn any 2. Okay, with parasomnias, again, there's another one here that Vika have removed. Okay, at the start of the study design, we had sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is no longer in the study design. So if you see that in any question, just ignore it, just keep going, because sleep apnea has been removed. Okay, the only one you need to know is sleepwalking. Now, what is a parasomnia? A parasomnia, and I often say that parasomnia kind of sounds a bit like paranormal. Okay, they both have the word para in them. So parasomnias are abnormal or unusual or even kind of unsettling or uncomfortable behaviors that people go through during sleep. So while these behaviors occur, they're still asleep. Sleepwalking is one of them. Another one that we don't look at in psychology is sleep talking. Okay, sleep talking is another example of this parasomnia because it happens while you're still asleep. Okay, so remember, parasomnias refer to abnormal or unusual occurrences, similar to like paranormal activity, for example. Okay, that's unusual, that's abnormal. Parasomnias are unusual or abnormal sleep events, and they always occur during sleep. Okay, while the person is sleepwalking, they're still asleep. That's why it's called sleepwalking. Okay, so that's the idea there. Whereas with insomnia, the person is awake, they're not yet asleep. Okay, that's the difference between the 2. So sleepwalking is when a person physically gets up from sleep and they start walking around or engaging in other activities while they're still asleep. Sleepwalking episodes don't last more than 15 minutes. Okay, the person isn't walking around all the way to the other side of town. Okay, they usually last within 15 minutes, and usually the person is within their home. However, there have been stories of people who have sleepwalked and they leave their house, go to the local park and come back. I have read stories like that, but generally sleepwalking episodes occur within the home and they don't last more than 15 minutes. They can happen up to 3 times a week in people who experience sleepwalks. Now, although the sleepwalker is asleep, their eyes remain open, but they've got this kind of dead look in their eyes. So it's kind of like they're sleepwalking and they literally look like dead. Their eyes don't have any kind of expression, okay? They're just blank, okay? Now, as you sleepwalk, you might appear as though, the person might appear as though they're just normally walking, but if you say, hey, what's up, what are you doing? They'll be unresponsive. They won't respond to you, okay? Now, the best thing to do with a sleepwalker is to just leave them alone. Don't try to shake them or wake them up, because remember, while they're sleepwalking, they're in the deepest stage of sleep. They're in NREM stage 4. That's when this kind of stuff happens. So if you wake them up, they will be very unsettled. They'll be very scared as well. Like, where am I? Oh my God, I'm not in my bed. Okay, so it might actually cause them to feel very unsettled, like something went wrong or that they're in danger. So the best thing to do is to leave them alone. And when you leave them alone, they will actually end up going back to bed themselves. Okay, sleepwalkers have a very strict routine to how they do their sleepwalks. It's usually like walking down, climbing, coming down the stairs, going to the kitchen, going back up to their bed. Okay, it's not like they take different routes each time they sleepwalk. Okay. A lot of the time, and this is the funny part, a lot of the time when you sleepwalk or when you see someone sleepwalking, they might actually also do other tasks. So they might start eating, okay, open the fridge, grab a piece of cheese or something. They might start cleaning, so grab the broom, kind of sweep the kitchen a bit, okay, and they can even go upstairs. And there's actually a video, and I'll post the link to that on the school box. I usually show it in class. It's about a girl who's filmed her dad sleepwalking. It's actually funny. I don't know if it's fake. I think it's not fake, but I'll post it on the school box and you guys can have a watch of that. And you can see in that dad who's sleepwalking kind of like the dead expression in his eyes and how he tries to do other things while he sleepwalks. Okay, so I'll put that on the school box for you guys to have a look. Sleepwalking is also known as somnambulism. So somnambulism is kind of like the technical term. It's not something we'll ask you in the SAC, but it's something that you should just be familiar with, that if you ever see that word, you know that that's just another word for sleepwalking there, okay? We generally use the term sleepwalking though, and that's the word that's used in the study design as well. Okay, moving on to the next slide, which is talking about the effects of sleepwalking on your sleep-wake cycle. So similarly, we've got 3 here. I only want you to know 2. Okay, so learn any 2 that are easiest for you to remember. Again, someone who's sleepwalking, they're sleepwalking during NREM stage 4 sleep. So if you do wake them up, or if they wake themselves up while sleepwalking, they're going to experience sleep inertia. And remember, we said that if you're awoken up, or if you're woken up during stage 4 or stage 3 sleep, it's very difficult for you to fall asleep again, because you were woken up during a very deep stage of sleep there. Fragmented or broken sleep. So obviously, if you're like walking, like doing 10,000 steps every night, you're going to feel very tired the next day. Okay, that's going to lead to a lot of sleepiness during the next day. And it's also going to lead to a lot of broken sleep, okay, because you have kind of moved too much during sleep. Okay, there's normal movement like tossing and turning in bed, and then there's abnormal movement like actually getting up and walking. Okay, so sleepwalking is that example of the abnormal increased movement. And so when you wake up, you're going to feel like you didn't have restful continuous sleep, obviously, because you were walking around the house, okay, when you were in your deeper stages of sleep. And remember, we said the deeper stages of sleep are supposed to be the restorative. The NREM deeper stages of sleep are supposed to help us with the physical restoration of the body. If while in those stages you're getting up and walking around, you're not really helping your body to physically restore itself. Okay, so you will experience that sleepiness and that physical fatigue the next day. So learn any 2 from this slide, the 2 that are easiest for you to remember. Okay, so when we compare dyssomnias and parasomnias, it's kind of just straightforward, okay? Dyssomnias are basically caused by difficulties, okay? D for dyssomnias, D for difficulties. Difficulties to the sleep-wake cycle, so sleeping at night as well as waking up in the morning, as well as disruptions to the normal kind of circadian cycle or sleep-wake cycle that a person goes through. On the other hand, parasomnias, like the word para, referred to like abnormal or unusual sleep events. So they're abnormal or atypical things that occur while you sleep, okay? And they happen while you sleep, whereas they happen while you're still asleep, whereas dysomnias like insomnia involve you being awake. Okay, this is the table from the book, just to show you another example there of the comparison. Okay, so this is again specifically now comparing sleep onset and sleepwalking. Again, these tables are for those of you who don't want to go through the previous slides in detail, maybe don't have time, maybe you're just doing some light revision before the SAC. Go through these tables. They still give you a summary of what it's about, and they will kind of get you through rather as compared to not going through this topic at all. Okay, so that's basically 10D. Now we are going to go through 10E as well, just to wrap it up. I know it's 2:30, but it's okay. I will just take an extra 15 minutes of your time. And I know year 12s have something at 3 o'clock with the local MP. So I am obviously going to finish within the next 10 to 15 minutes, okay? So the last spread is looking at sleep disorder interventions, okay? So sleep disorder interventions are basically what are the interventions or treatments that we can use to help people who have insomnia, sleep onset insomnia, as well as people who have issues like shift work, jet lag, or adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift. So they're circadian phase disorders. Okay, and guys, just to also add one more point here, there is no treatment or intervention for sleepwalking that we study about in this study design. Okay, there might be different management strategies for it, but we don't study any of them in this study design. Okay, we only study about the intervention for sleep onset insomnia, as well as those 3 circadian phase disorders. Okay, so this is just a summary or an introduction to what this 2 interventions are, and they're both examples of psychological interventions there. So the first one is called cognitive behavior therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy involves changing your cognitions, which are your thoughts, okay, as well as changing your behaviors. The general idea, guys, here is that if I change the way I think, I can change the way I feel. And if I change the way I feel, I can possibly change the way I behave. So that's the basic idea. Now, you might be thinking, how does that help someone who's got sleep onset insomnia? It does help a lot, because some people's sleep onset insomnia is actually the result of them overthinking too much. It's the result of them thinking that they can't go to sleep. You know, when you're awake in bed and you're like, oh my God, why can't I just go to sleep? That is an example of a negative thought that's kind of causing you to blame yourself for not being able to go to sleep. Okay, so cognitive behavioral therapy involves cognitive strategies as well as behavioral strategies to make you think in a more positive way and make you do behavior or engage in behavior that's more promotive of sleep. Okay, so that's the basic idea. And I'll just show you guys an example here. The cognitive part of CBT aims to change the person's irrational or negative ways of thinking, okay? So if the person says, oh my God, I can never get to sleep like everyone else, I'm hopeless, okay, I can never get to sleep. You're really focusing on a lot of negativity there and a lot of self-blame. So if I was to take that person and put them into CBT, the first thing they will do is they'd undergo the cognitive component of CBT, and that involves addressing that unhelpful or negative thought. Okay, first we say, okay, what are you thinking when you're sleeping? And then the person says, okay, this is my thought. Okay, I can't sleep like everyone else, I'm hopeless. Then I might say, okay, I want you to now examine that thought. Think about, is it actually, is it something that you believe that you are actually hopeless? And is it something that you, you truly believe that you want to blame yourself for this? So then we get them to obviously examine the thought. And the third thing is we get them to evaluate how realistic or helpful it is. So I would say something like, if I'm the psychologist, I might say, okay, is it really good for you to say you can never get to sleep like everyone else? Didn't you go to sleep last night or the night before? How can you keep using that word never? Okay, when you actually do get to sleep sometimes, it just takes you a little bit longer. How can you say you're hopeless when you're trying your best to go to sleep? So what we're really doing is we're trying to give them like a little pep talk, and we're basically trying to make them rethink the way that they think about sleeping. Okay, and build up their confidence to make them think that, yes, they can develop a normal sleep pattern just like everyone else around them. Okay, so those are the 3 steps involved. So that's the cognitive part of CBT. The behavioral part of CBT involves using behavioral techniques or changing your actual behaviors related to sleep. So for example, doing behaviors that will promote good sleeping, doing behaviors that will promote good sleep, or, avoiding problematic behaviors that might stop you from having the best sleep. So good sleeping behaviors like setting a sleep routine, having like a cup of maybe, warm milk or something before bed, or doing something that helps you to fall asleep faster. Avoiding problematic behaviors is like not using your phone before bed, not having too much caffeine before bed, all of those things that might impede or interrupt you from having a normal sleep pattern. That's the behavioral component of CBT. So remember, the behavioral part of CBT is about actions, okay, or behaviors that we can do to get better sleep. And previously, the cognitive part of CBT was about changing your thoughts. Okay, that's the difference. And that's basically what makes up CBT. When we look at the behavioral part of CBT, we can kind of go into a little bit more detail here, talking about the behavioral strategies. So just some examples. And these are like common sense, guys, when you think about it, okay? We're talking about things like setting a specific bedtime. Okay, if you tell yourself, I'm going to go to sleep every day at 9 p.m. and you stick to that, okay? You stick to that. You might go 9:10 some days, 9:15 other days, but more or less you stick to that time range. That's good. That's a good strategy. No napping during the day, because sometimes that can throw off your sleep-wake cycle. Not using your phone or devices in bed. That's another good strategy you can use. Setting and following a sleep routine. A lot of people have a winding down routine. Okay, like they have a warm bath before bed, or, you know, they have a cup of herbal tea before bed, or a glass of warm milk, something like that. That just helps you to settle down, telling your body that, okay, I'm going to go to bed soon. As well as, if you can't get out of bed, rather than sitting in bed and complaining and just feeling bad, get up and do some relaxing activity, like do a little stretch or a little bit of light yoga or something like that. And that might help you to fall asleep a little better. Okay, sometimes people are awake in bed because they're hungry. Okay, so that can also be a reason that they're not able to fall asleep. So again, a behavioral strategy is getting out of bed, not wasting time in bed. If you can't fall asleep, and just getting up and doing something that will help you to fall asleep better. Sleep hygiene is a key word as well, guys. Sleep hygiene is basically similar to physical hygiene. When we're talking about physical hygiene, we're talking about what can you do to be more physically sanitary, like washing your hands after using the bathroom, all that kind of stuff. Okay, sleep hygiene education is about what are the basic practices that you can do to have better sleep. And there are a lot of different examples here. I just want you guys to learn any three. And like I said before, a lot of this is common sense as well. Okay, like not consuming stimulants like caffeine or coffee before bed, avoiding a lot of vigorous exercise before you sleep, because that actually activates your brain and causes you to stay awake, not eating a heavy dinner before you sleep, not using the bedroom as a place to study or work. And I know a lot of us do this, but it's basically to associate one's bed with relaxation. Okay, if you are doing all your work in your bed, when it comes to time to sleep, you're like thinking about work because you've made that association between your bed and doing work. Okay, as well as ensuring that you're exposed to adequate natural light during the day. And this is sad because a lot of the time now, last 14 days of ISO and all that stuff, like a lot of us haven't been exposed to an adequate amount of natural light. And that might be the reason, as I said last class, a lot of us are experiencing things like sleep deprivation, not being able to go to sleep at the normal time. Like I've experienced that myself, and I know that that's probably one of the main reasons why, okay, not having exposure to natural light. So speaking of natural light, just as a recap, it's important for you to remember how light affects your circadian rhythm and your sleep-wake cycle, okay? When we're talking about light, we're talking about the fact that when we go outside and we see light in the morning, or when we open our blinds or we open our curtain and the light comes in, when we see that light, our brain actually signals to something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain to tell the pineal gland is responsible for releasing melatonin, to actually stop. So you see the light and then the brain tells the pineal gland, stop releasing melatonin. When the brain tells the pineal gland to stop releasing melatonin, we feel more awake. We feel more alert. We basically don't feel sleepy anymore, okay? This is why, for example, and I'm experiencing this more and more now, sometimes when you fall, don't feel sleepy. Okay, so you don't feel sleepy once melatonin release is stopped in the morning. And it's only stopped once you see that natural light. Okay, once you see that sun, when you open your curtain in the morning, melatonin release is stopped automatically. It's a biological process. You don't have to do anything extra there. Okay, and I've been experiencing this a lot, where if I wake up at, let's say, 6 a.m. in the morning or 7 a.m. in the morning, that happens to me naturally sometimes when I just see a bit of light. I wake up, I can't go back to sleep because melatonin's already stopped being released. I'm now awake and alert. So I have to force myself to stay in bed and often go on my phone or something like that until it's time for the school day to begin. So it's really annoying, but that's the basic biological process. Okay, now when light reduces in the evening and it starts to get dark, this causes melatonin to start getting released. So remember, when it's dark, the melatonin release goes up. Okay, when it's light outside, like when we see the sun in the morning, melatonin is reduced. Okay, light means melatonin is reduced. When it's dark, melatonin goes up. And this is why a lot of people who have insomnia are told to draw their curtains in the evening, to close everything, to make sure it's a nice dark environment. Because if you've got too much light in your house when it's like after dark or when it's time to go to sleep, that's going to continue to force you to stay awake, because melatonin does not get released unless it's like pretty dark outside. Okay, so that's the basic idea there. Now, you need that basic idea to understand what bright light therapy is. Bright light therapy is this idea that if a person cannot stay awake, even after looking at natural light outside, they can use an artificial form of light called the light box to help them to stay awake. And that's what we call as bright light therapy. This is a light box, okay? So a person basically sits in front of the light box as soon as they wake up in the morning. And if their issue is with getting up in the morning, let's say you find it really hard to wake up for school on a normal school day, you might actually wake up, sit in front of the light box for maybe 20 to 30 minutes, okay, before you start getting ready for school. And what you realize is that after that 20 to 30 minute session, that actually allows you to feel more awake and alert, because now that light has been detected by your eyes, and inside the brain, the melatonin release has started to stop. Okay, the pineal gland has sensed that you've been looking at light for 20 to 30 minutes and it has basically stopped the release of melatonin. Okay, and now this lady or you will feel more awake and alert. This kind of light, which is white fluorescent light, is different from the blue light that your phones emit. Okay, and the blue light that your phones emit basically suppress your melatonin production, but unlike the light box that we see during the day, you know, we look at our phones at every hour of the day, whether it's nighttime, whether it's 12 a.m. So blue light has more potential to harm us because it's just right in front of us. It's just so accessible to open up your phone in the middle of the night and just have a look at it. Okay, so that's why blue light, we say, is very harmful. And a lot of us have blue light filters on our phones to protect against that. Okay, so basically that's bright light therapy. And this is just showing you the effects of bright light therapy, okay, in terms of looking at it and how it helps you to basically mimic daylight, especially in days where there's not much sun outside or it's still dark. You can sit in front of a light box and kind of get the same effect there, okay? And again, that'll give you more energy. That'll give you an improved mood because you're not as grumpy in the morning and you feel more awake and alert. And because it's kind of affecting the release of your melatonin there, it will allow you to also have a better night of sleep. Okay, so this is just, again, just going a little bit more into depth. If a teenager, and I just gave you guys this example, if a teenager cannot get up for school or always feels tired upon waking up, they might schedule their BLT session upon waking up. So that immediate exposure to bright light, as you can see in this image here, will allow them to kind of kickstart or jumpstart the suprachiasmatic nucleus to stop the release of melatonin in the brain. Okay, so that will then allow them to feel more awake and alert and less sleepy and less likely to maybe take off a day of school or something like that. There are 3 factors that influence bright light therapy. Obviously, if you've got a bright light therapy, like a light box, okay, we call this a light box. If you've got a light box that's extremely strong, that is not good. And if you're sitting too close to that light box, for example, right in front of it, you might burn your skin because this is light, okay? This gets hot. This can actually go up in temperature. So it's important to make sure you're safely exposed to the light, sitting quite a distance away rather than putting your face right in front of it, like at a centimeter's distance or something. Okay, it's important that you do it at the appropriate time. If you always feel sleepy upon waking up, look at the light upon waking up. Okay, that's the basic idea. And the correct intensity of light. If your light is not strong enough, it's not going to help you that much, okay? It's the same thing, like if you, for example, have a headache and you only take 1 Panadol, but you need 2, it's not going to have the same effect. So the same thing works with the light box. It's got to be at the correct I wouldn't really say dosage, but I would say the correct intensity, okay, the correct brightness. And a lot of the time when you work with a psychologist, they can help you to determine what level you should have it at for the intensity or for the kind of intensity of your sleep disorder or your sleep issue. Some people have it worse than others. So for those people, it might have to be cranked up a little bit more. Okay, that's bright light therapy, guys. So the effect of looking at light on stopping the release of melatonin and helping you to feel more awake. So you can imagine for a girl who's got an adolescent sleep-wake cycle shift, or who feels sleepy in the morning, for example, that a light box will benefit her by making her feel more awake and alert. Okay, so let me just... this is a practice question. What I'm going to get you guys to do, I don't want to go too over time as well. I want you guys to open up this PowerPoint from Schoolbox and just have this question in front of you and then write the answer that you think. And then what you can do is reveal yourself the answer there. So if you click the space bar, the answer will come up, but I will hide that for now. Okay, so you can go through this question yourself as a practice question. Okay, so I'm just going to stop the recording here.